If you've tried to learn a new language before, then you know the struggle of trying to learn the sounds of the language. Maybe you've had a friend or a family member who had a hard time overcoming this hurdle. It's hard, but there's a way, and I'm going to share it with you in this video. Let's get started. How you pronounce the sounds of a language is one of the first things a native speaker will notice when you talk to them, and it's the one thing that most differentiates second language ability. And yet the sounds of languages are one of the most neglected topics in language classrooms and traditional approaches, which focus more on grammar and things like verb conjugation, which are important too, don't get me wrong. And immersion programs or approaches don't necessarily give the support that's needed to understand and produce the sounds of a new language. So here we're going to talk about why sounds deserve so much more attention than they usually get, a system that we can use to describe the sounds of language, and how to apply this system to the language you're learning. There's not a lot of attention paid to learning sounds in traditional language teaching. These approaches usually launch into things like learning words and verb conjugations, and then later on get into more complex things. But sounds always seem to get left behind, both for beginners and for more advanced learners. You might get that some of the most obvious sounds are different from one language to another, like the different R's in Spanish, French, and German. But other sounds you might not notice. For example, Spanish, Standard German, and some dialects of French don't contain the sound ah. Instead, they contain the sound ah. This is a detail that took me years of classroom and real-world Spanish learning, and in particular a Spanish phonology course, to get. But does it have to be this way? No. You can and should be learning the sounds of your language before almost anything else. It'll help you understand other things you learn in the language, aid in remembering words and phrases, and make people question whether or not you're a native speaker. If you don't spend the time to learn the sounds of your new language in a systematic and detailed way, then you'll automatically substitute the sound system of your native language for the new one. This can impact the way that people perceive your language ability, whether or not they understand you, and also how confident you feel in speaking. A very common example of this substitution is when English speakers learn a language that doesn't have what we call the schwa vowel, the sound that we pronounce in many cases for a vowel that is not stressed in a word. Take about. It's not about, or about, or about, it's about. And that first vowel sound is just a sound in the middle of the mouth, where we don't put forth any particular effort in order to make it. Or consider celebration. That sound in the middle there is unstressed and comes out as a schwa, celebration. So when English speakers learn another language, they sometimes use this sound in languages that don't have it. In Spanish, they might say dia instead of dia, or celebración instead of celebración. It's a slight change, but it makes all the difference. And this isn't like not knowing a word or not knowing a specific way to communicate something. Every time you speak, if you're substituting a sound from your native language into the new one, it'll be obvious. So if your goal is to sound like a native speaker of a certain language, the first step is learning the sounds of that language. Finally, in talking about why it's so important to give language sounds so much attention, it's important to realize that there's a huge number of sounds that could logically be differentiated in human languages. Think about it like this. The sounds s and sh are different because of what part of the tongue gets close to what part of the roof of the mouth. And if you move the tongue back and forth along the roof of the mouth, you'll keep pronouncing different sounds as you go. This is true for consonants as well as vowels, and there are many different ways that sounds can differ from each other, not just in the place where the sound is made. But from all of these possibilities, thankfully there's a smaller set that's actually found in the world's languages. And in any one language, there are only a few dozen sounds at most that are recognized as different from one another. That is, in any one language, there are at most a few dozen types of sounds, which we refer to as phonemes. And there's a system for describing how these sounds are made and organized in any language. And in using it, you'll be able to learn and pronounce the sounds of your target language in no time. In 1886, a group of language teachers got together and decided to devise a system that would represent any sound in any language of the world. The idea was that, given all the different writing systems in the world, and the different ways that the characters of these writing systems map onto sounds, there was to be one system that could represent them all. This system is the International Phonetic Alphabet, or the IPA. Here, I'm going to give you just an introduction to the IPA, but if you want a more in-depth video, let me know in the comments. The IPA is based on the Latin alphabet, and it was created and is maintained by the International Phonetic Association, also called the IPA. Each symbol in this system represents one sound. And this is different from languages like English, which have writing systems where a letter can represent many sounds, and one sound can be represented by many letters. An example is the sound E. In English, this is represented by EE, EA, IE, EI, EY, Y, and some other ones that are less common. On the other hand, we have letters which can represent more than one sound. For example, TH can be th as in thin, or like th as in this, or G, which sounds like g as in game, and j as in gym. Because it can represent any language sound, there are many more symbols than any language has sounds, including Latin. And this is why to the Latin characters they had to add some other characters. This also means you don't have to remember every symbol, unless you're working with a wide variety of languages. So why is this system so powerful? First, it takes sounds and maps them in the mouth. In addition, it provides a simple guide for learning to pronounce sounds, and it helps you to figure out what sound is being made when you hear it. Here's how it works. We can start with consonants, which are defined in three main ways: where they're made, how they're made, and whether or not they're voiced. Let's talk briefly about each of these. Place refers to where a consonant sound is made, and these places range from the lips to all the way down in the throat. So, for example, you have a bilabial sound, like B, made with the two lips, and you have a glottal sound, like H. The glottis is where the vocal folds live, and is all the way down here. Manner is used to talk about how a consonant sound is made. There's just a small set of these. Some common ones are stops, where airflow is stopped completely from coming out of the mouth for just a moment, and fricatives, where airflow is constricted so much you get a sharp noise. Examples of stops include P and T, and if you pay close attention, you can see that the airflow is stopped completely just for a moment and then released again. And examples of fricatives are F and S. In both, you hear the sharp sound of air moving through a narrow space. And finally, voicing is whether or not the vocal folds are vibrating when the sound is made. Linguists refer to vocal folds and not chords. Look up a picture, you'll see what I mean. A great way to see this difference between voiceless and voiced is to look at S and Z. With S, you can put your hand on your throat and not feel any vibration. With Z, on the other hand, you do feel vibration. S is voiceless and Z is voiced. And we can put these three aspects together to describe any single sound. P, as we said, is a stop. In addition, it's bilabial, made with the two lips, and it's voiceless. If you put your hand on your throat and say it, p, 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 there's no vibration. Another example is V. This is a fricative sound, one of those that lets the air flow through a narrow space. It's labiodental, meaning that you use the top teeth and your bottom lip to make it, V, and it's voiced. And vowels are also mainly defined by three aspects, but three different aspects to those of consonants. These are frontness, height, and lip rounding. Let's look at a couple of vowels that are pretty different in order to show these aspects off. The first is E. For this sound, the tongue moves to the front of the mouth and up, to where it's just behind your top front teeth, and it's unrounded. And this sound in particular, the lips are even spread. So we describe this sound as a high, front, unrounded vowel, E. And then there's U. This sound is still high, but instead of being in the front of the mouth, it's in the back of the mouth. And on top of that, it's rounded. So this is a high, back, rounded vowel, U. It can be harder to tell where your tongue's at when you're making vowel sounds, because the tongue doesn't get very close to any part of the mouth. But if you pay close attention, you can feel your tongue bunching up or spreading out in different places, and getting closer to or further away to different parts of the mouth. The IPA adds more detail to these, by getting into more fine-grained distinctions between sounds. But these basics are enough to illustrate that this system is a way to understand and describe the sounds of any language in a virtually exhaustive way. And now we're going to go step by step to see how we can apply this system to learning the sounds of any language. The first thing to do, as simple as it is to look up the sound system of the language. This can be found on Wikipedia or in linguistic introductions to languages. These will almost always use the IPA to describe the language's sounds, and we'll give examples to make it clear. This is an invaluable resource because you'll then know how many sounds there are in the language, and you'll have descriptions of them, which, as you understand the IPA more and more, will become more and more helpful. The next thing to do is to compare these sounds to those of English and any other language you speak. This may mean looking up the sound system of English, just as you're doing with your target language. The great thing about doing this is that you'll understand intuitively how the sound descriptions you're finding match the sounds that you make, and that in turn will help you to understand the descriptions given by the IPA for the sounds in your target language. Just be sure to look for descriptions of the dialect or dialects you speak or know of, so you don't find descriptions that will actually lead you astray. Then, based on explanations for the sounds of your new language, research the sounds that are different from those of languages you know, until you know how to say each and every sound in your target language. Part of this will be understanding which sounds are considered the same and which sounds are considered different in the new language, and how this overlaps or doesn't with how it's done in English, just as we talked about. And this process will provide you an understanding of the sounds of your new language compared to the sounds of your native language, which will make it clear how to pronounce the new sounds, and make it less likely that you'll fall back on your native language when you're speaking this new one. And once you've taken these 3 steps, pay attention to how each individual sound mixes with others in running speech. This is something that you can do over time. One of the hardest things about learning a new language is the sounds. But if you take your time, use a system like the IPA, and compare the sounds of your new language to those of your native language, you'll be in a good place to overcome this challenge. And to start having people ask, "You're not a native speaker?" Thanks for watching. Let me know what you liked with a like. Subscribe for more content like this, and see you in the next one.